Hello and welcome back to the studio. In today's tutorial, I am excited to walk you through this very simple watercolor landscape. It's a very countryside landscape. We've got this nice brook running through it, and I'm very excited to kind of play around with a couple of different techniques and just show you the process behind creating it. To start, we're going to mix our colors, and I'm using this large watercolor palette that I generally use for my watercolor tutorials. And if you want a little bit more information about what pigments I have in here, I will link that video up here for you. Let's start with what colors we're going to play with. I'm kind of thinking just sticking with some of the basics. This is a very beginner-friendly tutorial, so I'm going to pull out some ultramarine blue for our sky here. We'll probably want to desaturate it. That's pretty bright, and I'm going to want to get it a little bit moodier. Also, just off to the side for my setup, I have kind of a dirty water, if you will. They're both clean at the moment, mostly clean, and a secondary clean water in case I just really need to clean my brush really well. I have a rag, and I primarily use round brushes. I'm going to go into quinacridone red, which is one of my favorite reds. A similar one would be like a Winsor red or an alizarin crimson, which if you just got a watercolor palette, that will be included in there, one of the two. And that's a little purpley. So we're going to pull in more of this ultramarine blue. Again, something that would be included in kind of any beginner watercolor palette. And I'll probably want to pull in a little bit of yellow. I'm going to go with transparent yellow, which is kind of my favorite yellow. It's a very light, kind of a mid-tone yellow, but a Winsor yellow or a lemon yellow would be an excellent alternative. I'm going to add just a touch in here just to kind of bring the saturation down a little bit. See how that just got a little bit more gray and a little more moody? It still kind of has some of those purpley vibes, so we're going to add a little bit more blue to it, but it just helps having all three of those primary colors in there at different ratios, obviously mostly blue, just helps to tone it down a little bit so it's not quite this bright anymore. And I could mix our green. I think I'm just going to go in with a sap green. The transparent yellow and the ultramarine blue mixed together beautifully to make kind of that mid-tone green color. But I think just for the ease of what I'm going for with this tutorial, I'm just going to pull in the sap green. Again, if you have a beginner watercolor palette, you probably have this nice warm green in there. I'm also actually going to mix it with a little bit of this ultramarine, so I have kind of a cooler tone version. See how that has a little bit more blue in it, and then we're going to do the same with our transparent yellow, just adding a little bit of that in there to lighten it up. And I'm going to add just a touch of our red in there, quinacridone red, and now we have kind of this more wheat tone. So that's one of the things I like about sap green. I mean, again, you could have mixed this with just using the yellow and the blue, and that would have worked out fine. But I love how, as far as using like a staple, there are so many different things that you can do with it very quickly, just straight out of the pan. So that's kind of a nice, something that I really like about it. And then I am gonna pull out a little bit of our quinacridone red with our transparent yellow and just mix kind of an orangey tone. And I am going to desaturate this a little bit as well with our ultramarine blue. Also, one last thing, I might use it, I might not, but if you have some just regular table salt, if you have just some regular table salt on hand, I might, oh, I already got it in my water. Oops. Clean that up. Grab some table salt. We might use it, I'm not sure. I have kind of an idea and a vision for this project, but we'll just see how it kind of comes together. And let's get started. So I'm going to zoom you in on the paper. We're going to talk about kind of the outline that I have, and then we'll start painting. Quick spoiler, we're also going to need some bath tissue. Just regular toilet paper. So grab that if you don't have any handy. A paper towel would also work. All right, so here is our paper, and you can see the sketch that I've already placed on there. It's very messy. It's just kind of giving me a general idea. And if you've done these tutorials with me before, you're really familiar with kind of, it's very fluid, it's very quick, and it's just kind of a fun exercise. I have cut this paper down to be 6 by about 9. There's nothing special about the size. I just cut the standard paper that I get in half in order to kind of create this size. And then last but not least, I'm going to tape the edges. You can use just like some regular painter's tape, like the blue tape or frog tape that you would use to paint your house. This is kind of an optional step, but it will help your paper. This is kind of a wet process. All right. Now that it's taped down, again, this is optional, but if you have trouble with, if you're using a lot of water and your pages are curling, this will help hold it down until everything is dried and ready to go. And it just kind of helps to avoid some of that problem. All right, now that we're all prepped and ready to go, we're gonna grab this blue, and I'm not gonna spend too much time on the sky, but I do want there to be some wispy clouds in here. So I'm actually going to try a technique I've been kind of playing around with. I'm going to take some clean water and I'm going to dab it in here. It's a little dirtier than I had intended. I'm just letting it be kind of wispy. And then I'm going to take my pigment, the pigment on my brush, and I'm just going to like barely touch the edge of those wet areas. And so it should kind of bleed in, but not the whole way. We'll see how it goes. Like I said, I've been kind of experimenting with it. I don't have as much time now that I have 4 kids to experiment and play around with different painting techniques. Now I've rinsed my brush off, dabbed it off on my rag, so that I'm just able to kind of move it around without adding any more pigment. I'm just going to kind of carry some of this color down. Don't want it to be too heavy. I want the bulk of the darker color to be up at the top. I'm just going to bring that down, give that a little bit of shape. Rinsing my brush off, dabbing it off again. Having some separation with this pigment, but that's okay. And I'm actually going to pull this down through kind of this tree section that we have here, just so it can be in the background. Now I'm taking clean water and I'm just going to drag it down here because that will help it to blend nicely. So yeah, it's kind of quick, kind of a rushed process, but we'll kind of soften everything out. Now I'm going to take our blue toned green, so our cooler green, our sap green mixed with the ultramarine blue, and I'm actually going to add just a touch of our red to it, just a little bit. It's a little bit bright for me. And I'm just going to kind of tap along this edge. Now if some of this area is still wet, that's kind of a bonus because it will fade a little bit. It'll spread, it'll fade, and by working with a cooler tone, that automatically tells our eye that this is kind of receding into the background. So I'm just tapping a little bit of this in here. But see how that looks like it has just this aerial perspective type feel? That's kind of what we're going for. I'm going to make one a little bit bigger. Maybe add a little more here, soften it with wet brush. And we extended the water, or the sky beyond that point so that if there are any negative spaces, it just kind of shines through. It's consistent and doesn't look odd. Kind of just come down here. This might not be necessary, but just in case. Okay, so we might tighten up this area a little bit. It looks like it's kind of, the water is still concentrated in this area, and so it's a little softer, but that's okay. Now I'm going to go into just the sap green. I am going to add a little bit of the red to that, just a touch in order to desaturate it a little bit. And I'm going to start adding in some grass in this section. And by working in sections, we'll have time to kind of work wet on wet a little bit. See how the two colors, same root color, same sap green, but by mixing in different formulas, if you will, of the red and the blue. We've got two very different feels going on. Two very different colors in the end. Taking a little bit more of our cooler tone with the ultramarine blue, I'm just going to kind of blend that in up here. And here, kind of creating a little bit of a hint of a shadow. Again, kind of right here. Just so that it's not like a solid black, it kind of blends in a little bit. And we'll be adding a couple more layers in here. I'm also going to go into that orangey red tone that we've grabbed. My brush is kind of dirty, so it has desaturated it a bit, and I actually like that. And I'm just going to add just the smallest hint of it in here. And then in here, we're having a little bit of separation, but that's okay. And I'm trying to kind of connect them. I don't want them to be too much like polka dots. So having things just gently connected helps to avoid that. Cleaning my brush off, just in the dirty water. We're not being crazy here. Grabbing some of our sap green, just to load that in here a little bit more so we don't lose it. All right, now we're going to work on this section. So I'm going to add, there's kind of a tree in here, or like a mass, and then we've got some more grass, so we'll kind of be repeating some of these steps. But first I need to mix more of our cool tone green. I'm kind of liking how that is working as our foliage, and then having the warmer green be more of our grass, weedy ground cover. And just adding that little bit of red in there really is making this. It's taking it from kind of a Crayola look, which is fine, to something a little bit more mature and a little more, I don't know, there's just a little bit more depth and interest, at least to me. All right, let's see. We're going to start up here. And this is, you can see it's brighter and it's darker. So as things move forward, we want to make sure that they have a little bit more emphasis. And this will calm down. We'll be kind of pulling off of it. So I wet my brush and just dabbed it off. So I didn't like clean it, just kind of to remove some of the excess. So again, wiping my brush off, rinsing my brush, and then wiping it off just so that it's still kind of dirty, but it's not, there's not so much on it, and it helps me to kind of blend things out. I should have brought more of the green down here. That's okay though. All right, adding a little bit more blue and a little more of our red. We're going to kind of mixing it to that same green color, but it's going to create more of a shadow tone. And I'm kind of thinking, I usually do light source from this direction, so let's just kind of keep going with that. That was my instinct. Let's just, sometimes you just don't want to fight what you're already doing. I might add a little bit in here, and going kind of here. And then I'm going to rinse that brush off, go in with more of our grassy tone. It's okay to touch and pull some of that in. That'll give it kind of an automatic shadow, a little bit of water to help blend everything out. Just bringing that down. Grab in some of our more blue tone. And I'm going to frame it in a little bit. I like to have a little bit, this is the shadow tone of it on the edge here. And then a little more here. And then I'm going to actually add a little bit kind of by the water's edge. We'll be messing with this soon. I haven't perfected how I like to do water, so this is going to be, that section's going to be just kind of coming together as we go. We'll just see how we do. And then again with our mauve-y tone, just kind of bringing it in here. Grabbing a little bit more, and there's not too much water on my brush because that would definitely get, would create blooms and kind of funny looking puddles. And just barely touching. While that's drying, I'm going to take a little bit of table salt, and I'm going to pinch and sprinkle that on. And it will kind of collect some of that. Grabbing a little bit of our red and just tapping this among kind of our little salt friends. Another thing I like about adding the salt is it helps kind of the placement of anything like this be a little more random as you're just kind of following how it naturally fell. All right, back in with our sap green with just that little bit of red, kind of our grassy tone. I'm just going to repeat those same steps, but with a little more depth being layered on. Now, if yours is already dark enough, you might not need to do this. I think it needed a little bit more layering, a little bit more depth, which I might have gotten if I had been a little bit more gutsy with my pigment right off the bat. I am going to take a little bit of our salt, again, just a touch, and sprinkle it just on the edge of this bank. I don't want to bring it up there because then it will, my illusion of space will be gone. I'm also going to quickly, before this dries, add in a little bit more of the shadow color up here. Bring it down once in a while. Just to help add that in. Then also going back in with our mauve tone. And again, just kind of where the salt happened to fall, just adding a touch more of that in. All right, back in with our cool tone green. And then we're going to go over this section, but I'm going to allow some of it to overlap. So that way, like some of this mistier section will look like it's even farther back. A little bit more water, just starting off a little too heavy. I don't want to compete with this section. I want it to still be soft. And we're going to bring it down here onto that. And just by those two touching, that'll help to create some depth. Wiped my brush off so I'm able to pick up some of this pigment a little bit more. Adding more pigment. And see how just having that little bit of kind of underlapping and overlapping turns this section into not just a line of trees, but kind of like the beginnings of a forest. And it just adds that extra layer of depth and interest. I'm going to carry this down on here a little bit. All right, going in with our slightly darker color, a little bit more red in here. Just going to tap this in here. Some of the bases of some of these sections. Especially the larger sections. A little bit of water, dabbing it off to help spread some of these edges out, soften them a little bit. And again, just give that illusion of it being a little farther back. Spreading that out. We're going to blend this over here because we'll add another layer here. And that tucks that back nicely. So this is kind of the intensity that we're going for. We'll see if we'll be able to get it. Wowza, that is a lot of texture. So we'll soften that up a little bit. I'm also going to start in on the water. This is all pretty dry, but I'm going to just run my brush along the edge of it, and it will kind of help activate some of that pigment again. And bring it all down. And this will just help to make everything a little bit more unified. There's not a lot on here, and I don't want there to be a lot. Then I'm also going to take our shadow color, but I'm going to add a little bit more. I'm kind of going for a desaturated blue-greeny. See how it's just this deep green. Now, if you've painted with me before and you have my favorite Perylene green, this is pretty much that color. So I'm kind of going for this. I might desaturate it a touch more with some red because I don't want it to read too green. Here we go. I think this is what we're going to use. I'm going to really water this down because I don't want it to be too much. And I'm going to just start adding some of this in on the very edges. And it's still a little bit wet, which is good. Dabbing. So rinse, dab. So I've got kind of a dirty brush, rinsing again, dabbing it off, again, dirty brush. I'm just going to kind of blend some of this in here. Rinse, dab. Rinsing, dabbing. And then I'm going to take some regular bath tissue, just crumple it up, and I'm going to pick some of this up. I got a little too zealous, and a little too zealous with the pickup, because I want some of this on the side. Okay, we've got kind of the bank started. I'm going to take a little bit more of that color. I'm just going to kind of, again, blend it on the side a little bit, focusing mostly on the bank itself. And we'll blend this in a little bit more again. So I'm rinsing the brush off, wiping it off really well on this paper towel. I really want it to be just barely damp so that I can kind of pull this along the side with this kind of this pickup motion. And that will help it to blend out without having kind of this harsh line. Then I can take that excess and tuck it in there. And I'm going to repeat the same thing on this side. Of course, you won't be able to see quite all of it because we've got kind of this little hill here, creating some interest. This just wants to be a bald spot. And we're going to extend that a little more just to be interesting. Rinsing the brush off, dabbing it off real well because I want that to be nice and soft. I'm going to soften this, too wet. Dab it again. Soften this area. Rinsing it, drying it off, and then just pulling. If you have an area like that that just kind of wants to be bald forever, just let it dry completely. Don't mess with it. I know that this is kind of frustrating. It's very much, I find that water, at least at this point, there isn't a great formula for it. So it's just, I kind of feel my way through it. No, we'll go back over it again in a bit. All right, and I want to get a little bit more clarity on what's going on over here. Some of these kind of bare patches are a little too much, so I'm going to have to soften those. So I'm going to rinse my brush off in the dirty water, dab it off this around. If we kind of go over these lighter areas gently, I'll be able to deepen them enough so that they're not quite so bright. They just were standing out, kind of like a beacon. Grab our green, our sap green with that little bit of red. So So kind of our grass tone that we've been using. All right, and I'm going to get the salt out of the way. You might need to use your finger. You might be able to just kind of brush it off like I'm doing right here. And just bring it in here. And just like before, kind of that underpainting will show through. But if yours is already pretty dark, don't worry about this step. I tend to work in where I need to do a second step. Maybe I'm too timid. We're going to take our red tone, and before this gets too far, I'm just going to add that in here. And then go in with our deeper tone in the shadows over here, just to add some depth. And then again here on the bank. I am going to, since this is still wet, take my wet brush, my damp brush. I'm going to pick some of this up. I want it to look like it's being tucked in over here. Pick just a little bit of this up. You can see some of that texture underneath by having kind of that light layer. I don't like it when it's too aggressive. So again, just dabbing my brush off on the paper towel, just picking some of this up. That was too much. And see how we've got so much layering in here now? I don't know, some people might not like that. That's what I find interesting. So not for everybody, but definitely for me. Okay, and I'm gonna add a trunk here, just kind of a hint of a trunk, keeping everything soft still. Going in with this dark green color lightly. And I'm gonna do that every once in a while, kind of in this curved motion to give the illusion of a shadow. Because again, we're kind of thinking, okay, well, if the sun's coming from this direction, we've got like this highlight on the bank here. We want to show where there would be other shadows, and obviously underneath the trees. But if we kind of carve out like, oh, this might be an individual tree shape, we've just made sense of something that initially was just kind of a foggy idea. Now, and a lot of this is kind of a foggy idea just because of the painting style. It was very loose and playful. And that bald spot, we're going to fill that in real quick. That area probably just got salty or something, and so it just was resisting the water, which is fine. But if you let it dry, suddenly it's not quite so ornery. I could probably do more of like a grassy thing. Probably be more accurate. So this is just kind of a glaze, so where I'm taking about kind of like this much, and I could even still dab it off on the rag before I go in. Whoops, yep, definitely need to dab that off. And you could pick a smaller brush for something like this. I just want to kind of give a hint of additional texture in here, and this will dry a little bit lighter, so it won't be even as obvious as that. But it's amazing what you can do to just, if you just give your brain a hint of what to think that this is, you don't even have to add in all of like the grasses and stuff like that. As people think, oh, if I draw, a landscape, I have to do every blade of grass. No, you don't. You give an implication, you tell the audience what the texture is, and they're smart enough to figure it out. Their brain automatically fills it in. Switching to a smaller brush, just to kind of just flicking it up. And same here, doing it in this deeper color. And see how automatically you're like, oh, well, it's all, because this section's grassy, and if I just add a couple more into some of these sections, it all seems grassy. And I don't need to do it on this side because that is too far away, so I wouldn't be seeing individual pieces of grass. And I like to connect these textured areas to something, so it kind of broke into this pink area. So I'm going to stick with it and just kind of follow it a little bit, even if it kind of splits off. All right, now I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to squint my eyes, and I can see that this area it's becoming like a ball, so I'm going to move that out just a little bit. Okay, now I'm going to take our real dark color, and you might need to just kind of dab it in to make it a little bit more realistic. That's what we got going on this trunk here. And it's still very wet. So I'm just going to take a clean, dry brush and just kind of pull out a little bit. Add a little bit more of that color, just a touch. All right, we might need to clean up that bloom a little bit. We gotta wait kind of till that dries, but I'm gonna pull back and I'm gonna squint a little bit. This is still kind of standing out like a beacon, which isn't really my intention. So I'm gonna go in with our shadow color along this section just a little bit more. I'm just going to, it's damp, pretty clean. Just gonna kind of blend some of this out. And I'm going to take just a touch of our blue that we used for the sky. So again, this was kind of a desaturated blue, but it's funny how this now looks so saturated compared to this. And I'm just going to pull in a touch of that, just a little bit, water it down in here. I just kind of want it in here a bit. We're going to take our paper towel and we're going to pick up some of the excess again. All right, and there we have it. So I added just a quick wash of the green that we used for our grass up here. And I think that kind of helped to pull things together a little bit more. I'm a little bit more happy with it. Like I said, I'm still kind of playing around with different ways to do water, different ways to do kind of these softer, more wispy clouds. And overall, I'm pretty happy with it. I hope that you found this tutorial helpful and enjoyable, and that you learned something, whether it was a way to use the salt but not be quite as intense, or different ways that you can mix minimal colors in order to create a wider variety of colors, or even just how to desaturate colors so that your landscapes can be a little bit more sophisticated and a little bit more interesting. Regardless, I hope that you are having a wonderful, wonderful day, and until next time, happy painting. All right, real quickly, I kept playing with it. So just something that I did real quick, I will be posting a reel and then I will link it in this video down below, or I don't know if I can link a reel in the cards, but if I can, I'll link it right here about how to fix a bloom. And so I kind of started this process. It's not quite ready, but that's what I'm going to do to fix this little bright spot that's back here. I picked up some of this and I actually placed down some of our transparent yellow and green mixture, that kind of light green, but it really brightened up this spot. So I also applied a glaze right here, that same color, in order to carry it throughout. Well, I keep playing with the water. I'm still not totally satisfied. I'm going to experiment with a couple ways, and I'll come back in a future tutorial and kind of give you whatever formula I find in order to make water just a little bit easier to make, a little bit more realistic. I've tried studying photos. I'm like, it looks kind of just white. But then, I don't know, it just isn't working quite the way I want it to. So I'm going to leave this as is. It's really wet and it's starting to get to the point where the paper's not happy with me. So I'm just going to leave it as it is and we'll come back in a future tutorial. All right, goodbye for real.